Sitting Pretty is the name of that song from a band called the Dotsons, and that would be from their self-titled debut album released back in 2002. Dotsons from New Zealand formed in 2000 and broke up 12 years later. Some good stuff by them, and again, a band that I played quite regularly when I used to DJ, and a number of good songs on the album as well, not just this one. So if you're curious, feel free to check it out. Hailing from a swamp somewhere deep in the heart of the heat battered South, this is Hexes and Soldiers, episode 23. My name is Jason, and I have donned the headset yet again to bring you your weekly wargaming bag of goodies, and thought this time I'd let my hair down a bit, kick off my shoes, and just kind of chit chat with you guys a bit, maybe, and hopefully this will give us both a nice break from the rather long winded, research laden historical monologues that you may have become accustomed to. Not that I don't enjoy it. The research that I do for some of these shows is actually the highlight of my week, and I mean that. I look forward to doing it, I enjoy doing it, and I gotta tell you, I've learned a ton of stuff along the way, and definitely look forward to a continuation of this learning process and research. So hopefully you guys echo these sentiments. And what else? How have I been? I have been okay, I suppose. I haven't had a heat stroke yet. I know it's coming, and you guys think I'm joking, right? I'm not joking. I'm going to be out there carrying the mail, and it's going to be one of those 90-degree days where the humidity is 300%. The birds don't fly here, they swim through the air, and I'm going to be passed out on somebody's lawn, and again, people are going to think this guy's nuts. He's out there playing a joke on everybody. No, he's passed out with a heat stroke. That's what's going on with him. And yeah, I'm going to be that guy before too long. I'm trying to remedy the situation, but not a lot of jobs out there. And not that I don't appreciate what I have and it pays well, but I'm getting at that age, and you kind of need health insurance. And the old post office, well, it ain't what it used to be. And they're hiring more just help. I don't think they hire too many career people anymore, which would entail benefits and 401k and health insurance, vacation, all that. I don't get any of that stuff. So again, the pay's good, but that other stuff would be nice. So I'm looking for something else. I don't know how else to put it. And for the last time, for the love of God, the Blues are out. They're done. That's right. It's over. So we got the boot in the first round, and if anybody would have told me a month ago that that would happen, I would have laughed them out of the room. But that is what has happened, and that's good for you guys because that means you don't have to hear any more reports about the Blues or hockey or anything to do with skates and ice or sticks, probably until October, deep, deep into October. Okay, maybe the end of September, which is when the preseason starts, and I'll be all excited again. But I have to say, I appreciate your patience. This is probably not the place to plug my parallel interests, but you guys have been very good about it and haven't protested too terribly loud regarding my Blues updates. But yeah, no more hockey till next season, so that's that. And came across this a while ago and then kind of forgot about it and then happened across it again, and it's somewhat related. I thought I'd share it. And I wonder if any of you have heard about this. It's a movie coming out, and it says this year. Now, I don't know how written in stone that is. Things are subject to change all the time. But it says it's coming out this year, and the name of the movie is Fury, which is an upcoming American, they say, action drama war film about World War II. Directed and written by David Ayer, and I should have looked to see what else this guy has done, but I didn't. The film stars Brad Pitt, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. He was in Inglourious Bastards, and he did an okay job, I suppose. Shia LaBeouf or LaBeouf, or however you say his name, and some other people that I'm not going to name, but um, it looks good, and I'm kind of excited about it. It's set to be released, they say, in on November 14th. So we'll see if that happens. But so what's it about? Okay. The film is set during the last months of World War II in April of 45 as the Allies make their final push in the European theater. A battle-hardened army sergeant named War Daddy, who is Brad Pitt, commands a Sherman tank called Fury and its five-man crew on a deadly mission behind enemy lines. Outnumbered and outgunned, War Daddy and his men face overwhelming odds in their heroic attempts to strike at the heart of Nazi Germany, and that is quite possibly set up to be a very interesting, fascinating, and exciting plot. Hopefully they do it right. The film's crews are rehearsing the film scenes in Hertfordshire, England, apparently, and this was September of 2013 that this was going on. Brad Pitt was spotted in the preparations of his new film driving a tank on September 3rd in the English countryside. I bet that would be a sight for somebody who didn't know what was going on. The shooting of the film began on September 30th of last year in the Oxfordshire countryside, and the Pinewood Studios sent warning letters to the villagers of Sherburn, Purton, and Watlington that there might be some gunfire, would be some gunfire and explosions during this filming. How nice of them to let the locals know what was going on so they didn't have heart attacks. On 15th of October 2013, they say a stuntman was accidentally stabbed in the shoulder by a bayonet while rehearsing at the set in Pyrton. Or is that Pyrton? He was taken to John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford by an air ambulance. Police confirmed that they were treating it as an accident. And a hell of an accident. In November, the film caused controversy by shooting a scene on Remembrance Day in which extras wore Nazi uniforms, and Ayer, the director, apologized for the incident, and Sony also made an apology. You know, a lot of people still are not ready to accept, how to put this, that whole era is still a touchy subject, and I understand. But anyway, the film will feature the last surviving operational Tiger tank, which they say is Tiger 131, belonging to Bovington Tank Museum. And this will be the first time that this tank has been used on a film set. So that is very cool, and can't wait for that. Hopefully we'll see some good, authentic action, replication, simulation, what have you. And then in the news, not too much going on other than a ton of ASL stuff. And that, when I say a ton in regards to ASL, that's really probably not. But in comparison to the normal amount of ASL news that gets released at this particular time, it is in fact a ton. It's relative. And I've called this from the Two Half Squads. They're not this most recent show, but the one before this. And any of you who are still unfamiliar with the Two Half Squads, these guys have carried the torch for the greatest of games for over 100 episodes now. And it is a show, podcast, dedicated solely to ASL, and the only podcast out there that is dedicated solely to ASL. And they do a great job too, guys. They bounce a bunch of things off of each other. They're rather humorous and down to earth. Do not take themselves or the game too seriously. But a great show, and if you haven't listened to it, well, either start with the newest one or go back and start with the first episode. Some good stuff, but not the last one, but the one before this. They interviewed Perry Koch, who's been involved with ASL for some time now. How long, I can't say. And he divulged some things that I was unaware of, and was happy to hear reported, and I'll share them with you. The long-awaited Finnish module Hekapale, which any of you who have listened to the show have probably heard me whine. I'm not the only one, but here's what he's saying, okay? You ready? Are you sitting down? You're not up on a ladder or holding a bunch of groceries? Set it down, take a seat. It's supposed to go on pre-order this summer, and shipping should be sometime around summer/fall. And that, if that's true and things stay the course so that this can happen, this is probably the best news I've heard since the last best news I've heard. I know that probably doesn't make any sense. That's fine. Um, but yeah, that's probably the biggest news is the Finnish module Hekapale finally going up for pre-order here. So keep checking the MMP site. You never know when they might do that. And then says that they are going to be reprinting starter kit number 1, which is good because I'm watching these things. Oh my lord, on eBay, oh, people are getting robbed. I'm sorry. I know you guys can't be blamed for selling something uh, and getting what people are willing to pay for it. But I think some of you might be taking advantage of people, and I don't know. Some of these starter kits are going for astronomical figures. It's just ridiculous. But people want them, and they're willing to pay it. So again, I can't blame anybody for selling it for 4 or 5 times what its original price was. And yeah, this is going to be reprinted, and that's fantastic because that means more people will have access to this, hopefully be pulled into the game, and not have to remortgage the house to do it. Action Pack 10 looks like will be up for pre-order this summer, and that will be the second in what is a trilogy of Pacific Theater scenarios. And I think the first one deals with all the Burma stuff, so that's cool. And Special Ops number 5, not specifically ASL related, but MMP's House magazine should be available. They say for the World Board Gaming Championships. If you go to that, you can get one there. If you don't, you gotta wait till the end of August. And that'll have, of course, ASL scenarios, starter kit scenarios in there. And then by the end of the year, and this is probably rather sketchy to say, but they're saying by the end of the year, for the first time ever, ASL will be taking its foray into the Korean War with an ASL Korean War module, and they're saying this will be up for pre-order by the end of the year. So they'll have the U.S., the North, South Koreans, Communist Chinese. This could work. This could be very cool. This could be very good for ASL. Of course, it remains to be seen, but I think the faithful followers will readily accept this with open arms. Of course, there's going to be a few people that will hate the idea. You can't please everybody. But I think it's a good thing, and I bet it goes over well. And as far as the next ASL journal, Journal 11, I don't know if that was forgotten about or if they're done. I doubt they're done. But nothing about that was mentioned, so we'll have to continue to hold our breath there. And then some other stuff. We've got a reprint of Yanks, which is the Americans in ASL. Of course, Rising Sun has the U.S. Marines, but Yanks will include Paratrooper as well. And MMP's been doing this with reprints. Again, with Rising Sun, they did this. Well, you've got what, Code of Bushido and Gung Ho bundled together, which is awesome because then you can have them both rather than buy the one for who knows how much and then have to wait for who knows how long for the next thing and then buy that. It's a great idea to bundle these things together. I really dig it. But they're doing that again with Yanks, and it's going to be bundled with Paratrooper, if I've got this right, and that should be cool. And then finally, the OCS Korea reprint, which Perry says is the most accessible of the OCS games, is moving right along. And then Reluctant Enemies, which I call, and I don't know why they're not calling this, OCS Starter Kit. Pre-orders for that should start shipping soon, so if you haven't pre-ordered yet, what you waiting for? Get over there, pre-order, and await its arrival. So that basically does it for the news. And again, this particular episode, to reiterate, is not going to be thick with history. So what is it going to consist of? Well, this is going to be what I like to call a retro-sode, in so much as I said I left a lot of these in the last show, old Wargamer and Fire and Movement and Generals back in St. Louis. That's only half true. I left all the Generals back in St. Louis, the Avalon Hill magazine. But it looks like I did, in fact, bring a number of Fire and Movement as well as Wargamer magazines from back in the day, and I thought I'd just, among other things, flip through and wax nostalgic with you guys regarding the particular time. And we're looking at, well, with issue 62, 1989, October, November, and then issue 63, 89, and 90 of December and January. Yeah, flip through these to wax nostalgic with you guys. Like I said, just kind of take it easy and not make you guys have to think so hard. And, of course, a little bit of reading, but it's a good thing. These will be what they did here with Fire and Movement. Oh, let me back up. Fire and Movement, subtitled The Forum of Conflict Simulation. A number of these issues came out, quite a few actually, and a lot of people think of the General as the wargaming magazine, and to an extent it was, but it obviously focused more on Avalon Hill, victory game stuff. But then you have things like this, which dealt with a lot of other games as well. Cover of issue 62 has a bland, I think, bland cover of an aircraft carrier with a ton of planes on it, and that doesn't do much for me. But the thing that's cool about this issue and the other one is what they call a World War II anthology series. And they cover a bunch of games based on geographical areas. So you have the Mediterranean, the Pacific, the Western Front, and, lo and behold, the Eastern Front, of which I will be sharing with you. So open the magazine, first page, what do you got? Not playing Avalon Hill games may be hazardous to your health. Old Avalon Hill advertisement, full page, and they have on there a picture of Hollow Legions, Turning Point Stalingrad, and Main Battle Tank. I guess those were new at the time. And it says, regarding may be hazardous to your health. When you combine play with laughter, this triggers the release of two hormones in the body, endorphins and enkephalins, and this triggers healing and bolsters the immune system. So they are using that to sell games. I don't know how well that worked for them. I don't think they needed to do that, as their games spoke well enough on their own. But that's kind of cool. And then a couple editorials under what they call Firing Line. And a close-up on modern naval battles. And I tell you, I don't know what it is about naval stuff, but other than the sub thing, it just missed me. Again, I'm not sure what the deal is. My brother lived and breathed anything naval. I didn't catch that bug from him, thankfully. No offense to those of you that love it. I guess understand the appeal, but it doesn't like me. How about that? It's not that I don't like it. It doesn't like me. There. Is that better? And then they do Naval Anthology, which, again, for those of you that like Navy stuff, this would be right up your alley. A review and analysis of Advanced Squad Leader Module Crescendo of Doom, which becomes the last hurrah. And go into depth about that. And there's an ad right here for Bloody 110 by the Gamers. Very cool. Gamers doing their own advertising. And then you get to the, what I like to call, meat of the matter. And that is the Eastern Front stuff. So I'm going to do a bit of reading here. And that's really what the show's bulk of it's going to consist of. So yeah, this is by Rick Swan. And this is an overview, and it states that games of the Eastern Front, and you got to remember again, sorry to reiterate and repeat myself, but this is back in 1989, so place yourself in that mindset. The games of the Eastern Front have been among the most popular of the last 2 decades. The fact that this is so is hardly surprising. It would be difficult to find a topic more inherently dramatic than the struggle between the Germans and the Soviets. The public's fascination with the era remains undiminished, and understandably so. Unlike many modern military actions, a clear distinction existed between the good guys and the bad guys. It had taken isolationists with a heart of stone to deny necessity of intervening against the Third Reich. World War II, the East Front in particular, is a game designer's paradise, and gameable situations abound, with an enticing assortment of tactical, operational, and strategic possibilities ripe for examination. Land, air, and sea elements are all in evidence, as are formidable front lines, a variety of defensive tactics and counteroffensives, and far-reaching quirks of fate, most notably the treacherous Russian weather. Additionally, a designer can draw on a mountain of information, a massive database that can or should take much of the guesswork out of historicity. He says it's surprising then that game publishers were relatively slow in realizing the potential of the East Front. For instance, Gettysburg, Chancellorsville, Waterloo, and D-Day were among Avalon Hill Game Company titles that preceded the 1963 publication of Stalingrad, and it wasn't until the 1970 release of Panzer Blitz that interest in the East Front really began to pick up speed. Now, is that because of the subject matter, would you say? I guess so. Or the game itself, Panzer Blitz, did that open people's eyes to gaming possibilities via rules and mechanics and things like that? I don't know, probably just the history. But he says it hasn't stopped since, and to this day it hasn't stopped. I mean, how many East Front games continue to be made? Okay, stop for a second. Ready? GMT alone. How many operational or strategic East Front games do they put out a year? And they continue to do it, and people continue to buy them. The Dark Valley, is that the most recent one? And, there's a lot of hoopla going on about that. Probably all good and well deserved. But that'll die down, and then the Dark Valley will come out. It's definitely a product that will has proven its ability to sell again and again and again. It's a shame there's not a stock market that you can invest in when it comes to war games. If you were to do so, East Front stocks would be your best bet. Those things continue to make money. Anyway, sorry about that. It hasn't stopped since. There's been an explosion of East Front titles in the wake of Panzer Blitz, and if this guy's still alive, oh, I wonder what he thinks now. Easily over 100 in the last 2 decades. If the subject's popularity has peaked, you couldn't prove it by the publishers, as virtually all the majors have released new East Front games in the last couple of years. To name a few, TSR's Moscow 1941, 3W's The Tigers Are Burning, and regarding that title, I always remember a guy who commented on Board Game Geek about it, and it sticks in my mind to this day. He says the Tigers are boring. He didn't like it much. Game Designer's Workshop, Scorched Earth. Early East Front games, like most war games of all subjects, took an operational approach. Then, as now, there's no universally accepted definition of an operational game. But if it's considered to be a simulation of a particular battle that avoids a lot of tactical detail, then Stalingrad is the first such East Front game of any consequence. Although it worked as an interesting playable contest, Stalingrad's lack of meaningful detail and its shortcomings as a historical recreation didn't exactly generate a deluge of similar titles. Well, you got to start somewhere, and I understand that, but you can't expect Guderian's Blitzkrieg or Case Blue right off the bat, can you? It wasn't until the early 70s that the first flood of East Front games hit the market. Courtesy of the ever-prolific SPI, the Battle of Moscow led the way in 71. Wow, 2 years before I was born. Followed by Kursk, Turning Point, Moscow Campaign, Destruction of Army Group Center, and a revised Barbarossa, all more or less on an operational scale. All had their share of interesting rules and worthy experiments, though none were particularly successful as either games or simulations. And the argument of is it a game or a simulation, and then how much of a simulation is it? These arguments get about as heated as an argument can get. And to go back to that thread that I talked about a couple of shows ago regarding ASL, and the guy was saying it wasn't much of a realistic or accurate simulation. Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, it is compared to a lot of things, but it isn't compared to being there with your boots on firing a rifle. I mean, what do you expect? It's a game. I mean, and another thing I read just recently is maybe it's not your definition of a simulation, and that's fine. What it is the designer's interpretation of a simulation. You have to keep that in mind. It says all, however, hinted at a problem that designers would continue to struggle with for a decade or more to come, namely how to make the German and Soviet sides equally interesting to play. Well, I don't know if that's that much of a challenge, really. The problem was neatly addressed in '76 by Mr. Dunnigan, who, with his breakthrough game Panzer Group Guderian, which was a real icebreaker, turned the drive across the Dnieper into a basically solitary exercise for the Germans. And if you guys out there have yet to play or experience Panzer Group Guderian, my lord, I don't know what you're waiting for. Panzer Group's primary innovation was the concept of untried units. which were deployed face down with their strengths unrevealed at the moment of combat. And I think this is brilliant. Not only did untried units make for a more exciting game, they also introduced a new way of simulating the fog of war by significantly cutting down on the amount of information available to the players, and that this information would be unavailable to a unit's own commander, that is to say, the owning player, did seem a little strange. But the system caught on like wildfire, and a host of Panzer Group Guderian-inspired games quickly followed. Among them, 3W's Assault on Leningrad, SBI's Kharkov, SSG's Army Group North, as well as Operation Typhoon. But Panzer Group Guderian succeeded in forcing players to look at the war in a new way. As much fun as it was, it did little to make the Soviet side as challenging to play as the Germans. This remained an accepted drawback of East Front games throughout much of the 70s. And then in the 80s, designers began to seriously re-examine the pro-German bias, which has come up in other publications, this quote, pro-German bias, end quote. And I guess they're talking more about a German perspective within the game. But you also had a pro-German perspective box art as well. I mean, how many of these games, maybe not so much now, but especially back in the day, had pictures of German tanks or German soldiers or German this, and it was almost like, the Russians were half of the history here, and without them you wouldn't have this history. But it always seemed like the Russians, anything Russian or Soviet, got pushed to the background and just served as kind of a prop for the Germans. So I see that. But while not definitive, the resulting games presented strong and distinctive challenges for the Soviets, and were certainly steps in the right direction. Notable among them, SPI's Battle for Stalingrad, which has a novel play sequence and combat system, and I believe we'll be getting to that possibly, but with that Battle for Stalingrad, isn't that the game where if the Germans, something about, based on a certain die roll, the Germans have to continue attacking, which is a pretty cool, I don't know how historically accurate this is, probably not at all, but it's a very cool game mechanic. And TSR's Moscow 1941, with its unique Soviet supply and defensive problems. Operational games are particularly good at exploring new approaches to specific game systems, which partially accounts for the overwhelming number of operational titles. And they note Hobby Japan's Bitter End, which I have a copy of, but not Hobby Japan's version. Bitter End, for instance, features an imaginative movement system. Duel for Kharkov by People's Wargames, I believe that's Jack Rady, tackles new systems for initiative and formations, while 3W's Kirovograd tinkers with supply rules to good effect. And I never owned a 3W game. I have no idea how they play. So yeah, seldom, however, does a single game risk more than a handful of experimental features. There's plenty of room for growth in this area. And though Stalingrad laid the groundwork for the popularity of East Front simulations, it took a tactical game to kick it into high gear, and Panzer Blitz, published by Avalon Hill in 1970, as a refinement of the previous year's tactical game 3 by SPI, not only introduced a new scale, it also introduced the idea of simultaneous movement in its optional modular movement system. Panzer Blitz was an unqualified hit, generating an inevitable string of tactical level games, including SPI's Sniper, which was a house-to-house combat, SPI's Firefight, which is modern US and Soviet small unit tactics, and Avalon Hill's follow-up, Panzer Leader. So yeah, Panzer Leader came after Panzer Blitz, and this was a West Front platoon level fighting. But the most significant tactical game was yet to come. Drum roll, ready? John Hill Squad Leader, published by Avalon Hill in 1977, and I have to say, man, this must have just blew a hole in the wargaming industry when this came out. Man, this thing was so ahead of its time. Seriously. Says threw many of wargaming's old preconceptions out the window to produce a strikingly original simulation that imparted a sense of immediacy like no game had before. Its rules for morale and leadership were groundbreakers, and its interlocking turn sequence was unprecedented in simulating simultaneous activity. But Squad Leader's most notable accomplishment was its total success in achieving its goals of design for effect, which essentially meant that strict realism was less important than the overall feel. It is precisely this, quote, simulation of command, end quote, that tactical gamers do best with, and in which East Front games seem to particularly excel. Victory Games' Panzer Command handles the uncertainty of command with a clever system of dispatch points and a random activation. West End's Tank Leader and Avalon Hill's Up Front both use playing cards to create remarkably tense and unpredictable combat situations. Of course, Up Front uses solely cards. Though Eastfront tactical games often sacrifice historicity for playability, and I would agree with that. As a whole, they are more fun for casual players than operational or strategic level simulations. Some of these games veer perilously close to role-playing. If operational games are the most diverse and tactical games, the most playable strategic games tend to be the most innovative. There's no better example, they say, than Rise and Decline of the Third Reich, a brilliant integration of the war's military and economic aspects, published by Avalon Hill in '74. SPI's Battle for Germany, though it doesn't amount to much in retrospect, broke new ground in '75 by assigning some German and Soviet units to both players. Then they talk about Clash of Steel, End of the Iron Dream, and Trial of Strength. And if I had a nickel, that old saying, right? For every time I looked at Trial of Strength, read about it, thought about getting it, I would be able to afford it. And I may yet pick this game up. Panther Games, 1985, skillfully combines strategic and operational elements with remarkably detailed research. Designers have consistently met the challenge of painting the big picture with some of the hobby's most interesting experiments. Since many of these titles are of fairly recent vintage, there's every reason to believe the experiments will continue. So, yeah, Trial of Strength. A lot of people say that this is a diamond in the rough, and then others say more of like a lump of coal. But I'm curious still, and I may yet pick this up. But moving along, it says one of the more curious consequences of Wargaming's quest for detail was the arrival of the so-called monster games, simulations that required inordinate amounts of time, effort, and floor space. The East Front has been blessed with some of the best-known monsters, and why wouldn't it be? Because, I mean, how much territory did Russia geographically cover? I mean, it only makes sense that these games as well would be huge. Yeah, the East Front has been blessed with some of the best-known monsters, including the very first one. Does anybody know what this is? Ready? Game Designer Workshop's Drang nach Osten, or DNO. This came out in '73, the year I was born, and it included 1,800 counters, right? 5 maps, and an estimated time of completion that varied from 50 to 100 hours. Of course, this game looked like kid stuff compared to SPI's War in Europe, the composite game of SPI's War in the East and War in the West, which is rumored to take upwards of 500 hours to polish off. Now, I love a deep, long game as much as the next guy, but I'm not sure I have 500 hours in me to dedicate to a single game. Anyway, of what use are these things? Aside from their value as collector's items, these front monsters are surprisingly playable. They note Fire in the East, which is the Drang nach Osten update. And I own a copy of Fire in the East, have set it up and started it, did not complete it. But they say it's not only a terrific simulation, but an awesome experience. And maybe it takes a spectacular game to do justice to a spectacular event. Nicely worded. So after a quarter century of simulations, they ask, is there anything left for Eastfront designers to do? Isn't that funny that they would ask that then? That's probably more relevant now, obviously, to ask. Tactical games seem to have reached a plateau, he says. I'd hate to try to top Advanced Squad Leader for detail, and as interesting as Tank Leader and Upfront are, they edge uncomfortably close to gimmickry. As always, the most fertile area for designers will continue to be on the operational level. There's lots to do with the Soviets, and designs in general are far too conservative. I can't think of a single operational design in the last decade or so that's been as startling as Panzer Group Guderian. And there's always room for a good strategic game, particularly of intermediate complexity. Political elements remain largely unexplored. And how do you feel about that? I can appreciate a game that integrates both, but I tend to prefer the political be left out. I don't know. It's like mixing your peas and your carrots. It's fine to have one or the other, but I don't like them both mixed in together. The following reviews are intended as an overview of the last 25 years of Eastfront simulations, It is by no means a complete list, and by way of list, if you'll notice, there was no top 10 list, so this list will take the place of that. But he goes on to say it is by no means a complete list, but includes nearly all titles of consequence along with a few blind alleys for perspective's sake. The reviews are based on the original Fire and Movement reviews, but have been revised in accordance to 1. How they've held up, 2. His own biases, and he says all else being equal, he prefers a playable game over a purely historical one, meaning he'll take a Tank Leader over Case White. Well, that's his problem. Assigning games into tactical, operational, and strategic categories is admittedly arbitrary. For constancy's sake, I sorted them according to the organizational size of the counters. Therefore, squad and company games are tactical, regiment and division games are operational, and division and army group games he places in the category known as strategic. And the ratings are pretty straightforward. Goes from 4 stars all the way down. So I won't obviously read all of these, but I'll do a number of them. And then finally he says, too many of these games, sad to say, are all but impossible to find these days. Isn't that funny? This was way back then, and he's saying they're already hard to find. Generally speaking, games published in the last few years are widely available, while games published in the last 10 to 15 years by the major companies, such as Avalon Hill and Game Designers Workshop, should be obtainable without too much effort. Just about anything published since the mid-70s will likely turn up at a game convention sooner or later. And of course, if the company no longer exists, the original SPI, for instance, you can count on their products gradually fading into oblivion. Snap them up while you can, and you know, that's still relevant today. So, starts with Barbarossa from SPI, gave it a 1.5 stars. And then another Barbarossa game from TSR, gave it 2 stars. Battle for Germany got 2 stars. Battle for Moscow got 3.5 stars. Well, this was created to introduce people to the hobby and was in fact given away free as a promotional thing. The Great Patriotic War by Game Designers Workshop got 3 stars. Corson Pocket got 3.5 stars, and that's the Jack Rady game I went into at length. Lebensraum, wow, what a name. 2.5 stars. Maybe some German bias there, huh? 1941, Game Designers Workshop, 3 stars. Rise and Decline of the Third Reich got 4 stars. Winner of the 1974 Charles S. Roberts Award. He says, true classic, the master fully designed Third Reich is easily the best simulation of its scale, and one of the best war games ever published. Covering the fall of the Axis in Europe, the game includes land, sea, and air operations in a detailed system that brilliantly integrates both the military and economic aspects of the war. At the heart of the game is the accumulation and expenditure of basic resource points, which are spent for the construction of combat units, declarations of war, and other major actions, and I guess paved the way for Axis and Allies, huh? Conquered minor countries produce additional points, which can be hoarded to produce even more points, or can be spent to initiate new offensives. The deceptively simple structure conceals a wealth of options, among them amphibious assaults, major country interventions, convoys, shore bombardment, and bridgeheads. But in spite of its detail, the Third Reich never feels overwhelming. It's an engaging, playable simulation that's as fascinating today as it was in '74. And he says no game before or since has managed to capture the spectacle of the German-Soviet struggle as successfully as the Third Reich. And I wonder what his opinions would be if he came back to these games today. Finally, he says Third Reich has been considerably cleaned up over the years. The second edition, of course, came out in '76, and this corrected a lot of the ambiguities of the original version, etc. So he liked that game. The Russian campaign got 3 stars. Winner of the Charles S. Roberts Award in '76. And this was considered state-of-the-art at the time. This simulation of the entire East Front campaign is still an extremely enjoyable system despite its age. It says the game is essentially an update of Avalon Hill Stalingrad with the same counter and board scale, but this is more authentic and enlivened by Stukas, partisans, and counters representing both Hitler and Stalin. The action is reasonably fluid, and the second combat phase after the second movement phase was a genuine innovation at the time. Winter rules tend to recreate the accordion effect of the real campaign that saw the Axis advancing in summer and staggering back in winter. With a rulebook under 4 pages, the Russian campaign is far from a definitive simulation, and some of its concepts are downright archaic. Got fixed zones of control requiring units to stop and fight. Well, archaic at the time, I guess, huh? But it's a challenging game that preserves its excitement to the end. There's that game, Russian Front, the Avalon Hill game, 3 stars. Just as Avalon Hill Stalingrad sired the Russian campaign, the Russian campaign is the parent of Russian Front. But although Russian Front modernizes and cleans up the systems of its ancestors, it still takes enough historical liberties to give fits to the hardcore. As a game, however, it's as playable as the Russian campaign and has enough new twists to make it the best of them all. The components are gorgeous, and the obvious anachronisms of the Russian campaign, such as the rigid zones of control, are no more. Units moving through enemy zones of control in Russian Front, it says, can touch off response movement to allow enemy interception. Combat is conducted between units in the same hex rather than adjacent hexes, and damage is taken by accumulating hits, quote unquote. When a unit reaches its limit of hits, it's eliminated. Although the systems are clean and workable, many of the rules not only violate historicity but also defy common sense. Stacked units, for instance, cannot add their combat strengths together. Yeah, I remember that. A unit's accumulated number of hits has no effect at all on its combat effectiveness, and a case can be made to justify these abstractions on the grounds of overall effect, but serious-minded simulators are unlikely to be convinced. For those that are not so picky, Russian Front is terrific fun. Let's see, Stalingrad by Avalon Hill came out in '63, got 2 stars. Sturm nach Osten. Now the first, let's see, what does he got? First edition. Oh, first edition has 1.5 stars. But the second edition was vastly apparently improved, as he gave that 3 stars. So, Sturm nach Osten, a simulation of Eastern Front battles from 41 to 45. Apparently this started as a do-it-yourself kit, published by the designer, complete with photocopied components that needed to be cut, colored, taped, and pasted into playable condition. Essentially an attempt to improve on Avalon Hill's classic Stalingrad. The design, he says, was nearly impossible to play because of poorly written and undeveloped rules. But lo and behold, a thorough polishing and revision by 3W a couple years later revealed Sturm nach Osten to be a pretty good game after all, comparable to Game Designer Workshop's 1941, but ultimately more satisfying because of its coverage of the entire war instead of only the first year. Its combat system, as well as a generous helping of clever embellishments. The system, it says, is based on monthly turns with alternating player segments consisting of replacement, movement, and combat phases. Except for fortified units or units separated by unfrozen rivers, attacking is mandatory. All attacks must be declared before determining results. Putting advanced planning at a premium, partitioning of multiple unit battles is quite discretionary. Even units in the same hex can be attacked separately in most cases, and he says also good are rules for juggernaut units, armor refit, garrisons, and leaders. Apparently there's a combat bonus for Zhukov, as well as movement bonuses for Guderian and Manstein. Sturm nach Osten is a textbook example of what professional development can accomplish, because without 3W's involvement, the game would have likely faded into oblivion. With high marks in both playability and historicity, this game is among the best games of this scale. Then Tigers Are Burning by 3W, or according to a certain gentleman, The Tigers Are Boring, got 3 stars. Trial of Strength got 3.5 stars, the Panther game. He says regarding this, it's a skillful integration of both strategic and operational elements, which mark Trial of Strength as one of the most interesting and original East Front simulations. It's an intense and demanding game of astonishing scholarship, but perhaps too much of a good thing for the casual player. Sounds like more of somebody's PhD, I guess, huh? At the heart of the game is the conventional land warfare integrated movement and combat system. An elaborate combination of combat and movement phases. It says unit stacks can merge or split up, while multiple stacks can coordinate attacks on a single hex. Fanning out when advancing after combat, a non-phasing stack can initiate reaction movement by rolling against its initiative rating Both combat and reaction cost movement points, with the cost varying with prevailing conditions. Combat movement continues as long as the attacker has movement points to spend. Additionally, headquarters are the game's most crucial units. At the lower level are the Axis Army and Soviet Front headquarters that exerted direct influence on combat and stacking. Army Group and Theater headquarters are the higher echelon, coordinating operations over a wide area and providing replacements. Owing to the game's ambitious scope, there are also rules for amphibious operations, mechanized units, political considerations, and even river transport. In short, virtually anything an army, a theater, or national commander might want to do. Trial of Strength is by no means a game for the novice. A single turn can take an hour to execute, while a complete campaign can become a hobby unto itself. And then we move to some tactical games. Cross of Iron, the Squad Leader expansion, got 4 stars. Won the Charles S. Roberts Award in '78. Panzer by Yaquinto Publications Incorporated got 2.5 stars, and a game that has been redone by GMT. Panzer Battles, SPI 1979 gets 2 stars. Panzer Blitz gets 3 stars. Panzer Command Victory Games got 3.5 stars. Came out in '84. Streets of Fire, the deluxe ASL module, got 3.5 stars. Squad Leader itself gets 4 stars. Well, I gotta read that. So, Squad Leader, winner of the 1977 Charles S. Roberts Award, says, arguably the most popular wargame ever published. Squad Leader has generated, and this is the original Squad Leader, not ASL, says, has generated 4 lengthy supplements, countless scenarios and variants, a massive revision, and endless discussion. No mere classic, Squad Leader is a genuine phenomenon, covering squad-level infantry tactics in a variety of Eastern and Western Front situations. Squad Leader dramatically simulates the feel of combat with a strikingly original system. The turn sequence, for instance, uses interlocking phases to impart a sense of simultaneous actions. Players conduct some phases of a turn at the same time, while a defensive fire phase allows the non-phasing player to attack the phasing player's moving units. And the line of sight rules are similarly unique. Line of sight is blocked only by the symbols of buildings, woods, and other obstacles instead of being blocked by the entire hex. Detailed rules are included for artillery, trucks, jeeps, sewers, virtually every other significant aspect of small unit combat. But the most noteworthy elements of Squad Leader, however, are the rules for leaders and morale. And leaders do not necessarily represent the officers of an infantry unit, but instead represent the exceptional soldiers who inherently command the respect of their men. The Russians are likely to have plenty of officers, but perhaps not as many leaders. Leaders have no firepower, although they can use support weapons, but are able to improve the movement and attacking abilities of the troops they are stacked with. If a leader passes a required morale check, he can use his leadership ability to help bolster the morale of other units, along with rallying broken units. Fast-paced and exciting, Squad Leader is an unparalleled illustration of the effects of morale and leadership on tactical warfare. And says Squad Leader is a premier example of, quote, design for effect, end quote. The controversial approach taken by designer John Hill, whereby the precision of a specific rule is secondary to its overall feel. Though Squad Leader is remarkably effective at realizing its intent, it produces some admittedly bizarre anomalies in the process, the most notorious of which is the 80-meter wide street on the urban terrain board. But Squad Leader has no pretenses to literal authenticity. Instead, it is an attempt, I repeat, an attempt to cast the players in the roles of participants rather than observers in tactical situations, and as such is an unqualified success. Streets of Stalingrad, the other deluxe ASL module, gets 3 stars, and these deluxe ASL modules of course include information cards for vehicles, scenarios, as well as enlarged hexes. And I think part of that was the intention was to allow you to use miniatures, and ASL did sanction an official release. I think there's some on eBay right now of miniatures that could be used for this deluxe ASL stuff. Up Front gets 3.5 stars. One of my all-time favorites. Gotta read that. Up Front boasts one of the most novel designs in the history of the hobby. Here, here. It's a card game. It has no dice, no map board, no charts, no combat result tables, no unit counters, in short, except for its rulebook. Up Front has little in common with even the most elementary war game. What it does have are 3 decks of playing cards, Over 400 informational cards and counters, a lot of fascinating ideas. The most ingenious component is the action deck, which contains 162 cards that can be used as random number generators, random position generators, or action cards that allow the respective combat group to perform actions. From the cards in his hand, the player chooses what actions will be most beneficial to a squad, and he may have them advance, take cover, terrain permitting, fire weapons, make sniper attacks, or perform any of several other options. The action deck becomes both a map and a continuously changing panorama of command options. It's a terrific system, demanding both tactical military skills and a good poker sense from the players. Because of its abstraction, playability would seem to obviously take precedence over realism, and yeah, very much so. But Upfront is considerably more realistic than conventional wargames in several areas. The use of terrain cards is much more effective at simulating the fog of war than a map, and no group can be sure of just what type of terrain is ahead or how easily it will be to traverse. In most board games, men can move and fire every turn, but upfront players have very little idea of exactly what their players will be capable of in the near future, and next to no idea of the enemy's capabilities. The impressive detail also adds to the realism. Weapons, for instance, include light and heavy machine guns, demolition charges, flamethrowers, all the usual stuff. Dozen or so tanks, all rated for range, accuracy, and firepower. See, there are rules for weapon malfunction repair, crewing assignments, overruns, close combat, ambushes, infiltration, and comes with 12 scenarios and extensive rules for a campaign game. Finally, it says, though play is a little heavy on luck, Upfront is a remarkable achievement. A breakthrough design that succeeds as both an excellent simulation and an extremely playable game. Very cool stuff. And then right after that is an ad for Assault on Hoth, which is the Empire Strikes Back game that came out. And you know, all the Star Wars, I think Empire Strikes Back is the best one. I got to see that as a kid in a theater and blew my mind right out of my head. It was awesome. And I don't know, you know, the newer ones, the magic isn't there. They're okay. There's just something's missing. And then I have to say, I will never forgive George Lucas for the Jar Jar Binks thing. That is just completely unnecessary. But anyway, moving along. Article on Harpoon. Computer games were just starting out, I guess. There's a review of Red Storm Rising. A review of the IBM/PC version by Microprose. I remember Microprose. They put a number of games out. Had an Amiga back in the day that had some cool games. Rocket Ranger was one of them that I enjoyed a lot. Operation Wolf. Oh, what was that sub game? Me and my brother were trying to think of it the other day and remembered it. Now I've forgotten it again. Oh, it was a cool game though too. The hockey game, of course. Sorry. Yeah, but no, that was good stuff. So, getting towards the end of the magazine here. Big full-page ad for the war in Europe, 1939 to 45, storm across Europe. From Strategic Simulation Incorporated for a Commodore 64, coming late in 1989. You know, this stuff that they're advertising is at the same time they're shooting themselves in the foot, because part of this is partially reason for a somewhat demise or waning of the board war game industry. But anyway, it was inevitable. Technology has a way of alienating, but then also, how do I put this? Reintegrating things. Time catches up. Anyway, I digress. Another ad for something, and then that's that. So that's Fire Movement number 62. Fire Movement number 63, and I'll make this a little briefer than the last issue. Front cover, World War II anthology series, The Eastern Front. And an ad, the cover of this one has a Europe Aflame on it. And then Avalon Hill Game Company, as soon as you open it, there's their ad, front page. Thanks, they say. Your votes earned us 6 Best Game Awards at Origins 89. I guess for Lee versus Grant, Gettysburg, Attack Air, Tokyo Express, and Kremlin. Very cool. Article on low intensity gaming, which has changed a lot over the years when you look at things like Labyrinth and that whole line of games. They just weren't there idea-wise, you know what I mean? What else? Big article in Europe Aflame. Wow. 2-page ad for Red Storm Rising and Hunt for Red October board games. And someday, although I will probably be greatly disappointed in how it plays, maybe just for collecting purposes, someday I'm going to pick up a copy of Red Storm Rising, and if nothing else, force my brother to play a game with me. Then we get to the operational games of the Eastern Front, and no long introduction here. Army Group South Quad from SPI, star and a half. Wow, I bombed, according to him. Battle for Stalingrad, SPI, 1980, 3.5 stars, Mr. John Hill. I'll read this. It says Battle for Stalingrad is an exciting, highly playable simulation of one of World War II's most critical battles. The game retains much of its appeal nearly a decade after its release. Veteran designer John Hill of Squad Leader fame focuses on the fight for the city using a system intended to spotlight a confrontation between dissimilar adversaries. The efficient fighting machine of the Germans is represented by superior units, restriction-free artillery, ample air support, and complete command control, while the struggling but resilient Russians are represented by advantageous terrain effects, strategic strongholds, and favorable supply considerations. Among the imaginative rules are the novel play sequence. Yeah, here it is. Germans must immediately attack with just moved units, continuing to move and attack until a drawn chit terminates his phase. Now, how cool is that? The Russians move and attack until a 6 is rolled, or until all units in command control have attacked. And combat resolution, a preliminary die roll, is required before each attack to determine surprise or ambush. Very cool, innovative things, I think, at the time. Credit is also due to David, he says, Parham, for a thorough historical background essay, and to graphics designer Redmond Simonson. This guy's name pops up all over the place in the early days, for a first-rate presentation. And like many of Hill's designs, Battle for Stalingrad emphasizes playability over rigid historicity. And it says some may be put off by this, but by his admittedly eccentric approach. Yet, there's no denying that the game is terrific fun and does an admirable job of simulating the tension of the conflict, if not the actual nuts and bolts. And, there's a lot to be said for that. If a game ain't fun, you probably aren't going to play it, so what's the point? Battle of Moscow, 2.5 stars, SPI 1970. Bitter End from Hobby Japan, 3 stars, 1985. Black Sea, Black Death, People's Wargames, Mr. Jack Rady, 3.5 stars. Case White from Game Designers Workshop, 1977, Frank Chadwick, it's 3 stars. Destruction of Army Group Center, SPI 73, Mr. James Dunnigan, only 2 stars. And then Drongnach Osten gets 3 stars from Game Designers Workshop, 1973. And the rating is more of an acknowledgement of achievement than an evaluation of a game, for Drongnach Osten is virtually unplayable by anyone other than the truly obsessed. The first of the so-called, quote, monster, end quote, games, Drongnach Osten simulates the entire Eastern Front from June of 41 to May of 42, and boasts a staggering 1,800 counters and 5 maps. Takes 2 good-sized tables just to lay the thing out, and in spite of some obvious errors, cities on the wrong side of their rivers, for instance. The wealth of historical detail and research is impressive. The game follows a fairly conventional play sequence, and includes features that at the time were truly innovative. Detailed rules for air combat, unit specialization, and exploitation give the players much to consider and are ideal for tinkerers. In spite of its immense size, the game's principal shortcoming is the incompleteness of the rules. The combat tables, for instance, are ambiguous in places, and even subsequent errata left many questions unanswered. Further, the game is unbalanced. A skilled attacker is almost unbeatable. And this game is a genuine groundbreaker, remarkable in its scope, and awesome to behold. This is by no means idle recreation. Drongnach Osten is serious stuff. A demanding simulation requiring enormous investments of time and effort. Advancements in the hobby have made much of this game obsolete, but its status as a legend is secure. Unentschieden, 3 stars, and Game Designers Workshop, 1973. And regarding Unentschieden, here we go, is a Drongnach Osten expansion set that adds 4 maps and another 2,000 counters. So, on top of the 1,800 you would already have, add 2,000 to that. extends the simulation to the end of the war. Partisans play a more integral role in Unentscheiden as they can be used by the Soviets to harass Axis communication lines and attack Axis units. Panzer units are also allowed to break down into regiments and recombine in Unentscheiden. Um, and Drang nach Osten, that means literally urge toward the east, is a German figure of speech used for the eastward expansion and colonization by the Teutonic Ordensritter in the Middle Ages. And Unentscheiden means a stalemate. So Drang nach Osten was Game Designer Workshop's first entry in the Europa game series, and was overhauled in the 80s, became better known as Fire in the East. Drive on Stalingrad, star and a half, SPI 77. Duel for Kharkov, 3 stars, People's Wargames, Mr. Jack Rady. Edelweiss, another game that has sparked my curiosity. And it's a misprint because there is no rating. But this is a huge game with 600 counters. Clash of Arms games, 89. 600 counters and 8 maps. It's the latest offering in Clash of Arms games Winter Sturm, or Winter Storm series, which covers operations of Germany's Army Group South in the USSR during 41 to 43. This is a successor to the previous Winter Storm, Stalingrad, and A Last Victory (Kharkov) games. Edelweiss uses the operational level Winter Sturm system to simulate German offensive operations. Standard and exclusive rules. The campaign game can give you a real feel for the vastness of the Caucasus and the steppes. No point in getting that if you have Case Blue. Fire in the East, 4 stars. It's a Game Designer's Workshop. This thing came out in '84. And read about this for a second. As Game Designer Workshop's massive Europa series expanded and developed over the course of a decade, the need for revision of the series' first entry, Drang nach Osten, became obvious. The result was Fire in the East. A total overhaul that not only made the classic Drang nach Osten obsolete, but became a milestone in its own right. Enormous in scope, meticulously researched, lavishly produced, Fire in the East stands as the definitive operational treatment of the entire Eastern Front. Among the noticeable differences are improvements in support rules, air combat, play balance, but virtually all the Drang nach Osten mechanics have been refined and tightened. Play follows a detailed sequence of administrative movement, air combat, exploitation phases, requiring fastidious planning just to keep tabs on the mountains of units sprawled across the map. It says there are quibbles to be sure. Infantry moves much too slowly. Truck supply seems unusually abstract, and stacking in cities is unnecessarily restrictive, but the solid systems and sheer size allow for endlessly flexible play. It says this is a big game, nearly 3,000 counters, and they be right, as I have set this thing up before and played the first part. 6 21 by 27 inch maps, and what I had to use, I had turned my bed, it's not a frame, it's more like a base, was for a king-size bed made out of 2x4s and masonite. Turned that into a game table, and this thing still wasn't big enough. I had to add extensions to this table for this freaking map to fit on it, and I had to do that for Case Blue as well. Just huge. I mean, but beautiful to behold at the same time. Let's see, requires a lot of time to play, but considering its size, Fire in the East does a remarkable job of balancing realism with playability. In terms of physical quality, system mechanics, and breadth of scope, Fire in the East is unmatched. And then they say Scorched Earth, which is the expansion set, was released in '87. If you add those two together, you have a game that you'll probably never finish. Kind of People's Wargames, 1981, 3 stars. Very cool history regarding this, and deals with Russian paratroopers, so I don't know how many games deal specifically with that. But yeah, parachutes across the Dnieper, it's a subtitle. Deals with Russian airborne troops. If you're into that, then pick that up. Kharkov from SPI 78 gets 3 stars. Kirovograd, 3W, another Jack Rady game, 3 stars. And Kursk from SPI, and released in '71, gets a big star and a half. Then Eric Goldberg's Kursk, which was released in 1980. And I'm not sure, putting Eric Goldberg's name on the box, and they did this. They build it on the box as Eric Goldberg's Kursk. Had he designed anything prior to this? What is it about his name that we should see this name at that point in time and recognize it or associate him with what? I'm not clear on that. Um, Perhaps more likely another game company did that, worked well for them, so they thought we got to put somebody's name in front of the title and see how well it does. Well, I don't know how well it did. I know this game is highly sought after still. I've come close to picking it up, but in fact, Kursk, in and of itself, the games that I own regarding Kursk, I don't know if I have anything even specifically on Kursk by way of games. SPI's Leningrad from 1980 got 3 stars. And a few more games here. Moscow Campaign, SPI 1972 gets 2 stars. Let's see, the SPI TSR Moscow 1941, which came out in 87, got 3.5 stars. And it says, like many games before it, Moscow 1941 simulates the 1941 German assault on Moscow, but does so with some especially satisfying twists. By incorporating a slightly different set of assumptions than those common to similar games, this game manages to make the usually static Soviet side as interesting to play as the German side. For instance, the game assumes that the Soviets had to struggle with the weather as much as the Germans, and they did. Since the Soviets suffer right along with their enemies in terms of equipment shortages and maneuverability, the collapse of the Germans is far from inevitable. Likewise, the Russians face unique supply problems and are forced by the victory conditions to maintain strong defense of cities other than Moscow. And the game assumes that taking Moscow wasn't necessarily critical to a Soviet surrender, and it wasn't. It wouldn't have been. I'm telling you, if Germany had successfully taken Moscow, the war wasn't going to end. It would have gone on, and Moscow would have basically just been relocated for all intents and purposes. Same with Napoleon when he got to Moscow. Thought sure the Russians would capitulate and peace terms would be gone over. Instead, he sits there for I think 15 days because he doesn't know what to do, because things aren't going the poor man's way, and he has to head back to France with his tail between his legs, and Cossacks trying to cut his tail off on the way. The basic systems stick close to standard conventions, but feature a healthy amount of detail, including Soviet paratroops, forced marches, fortifications, Soviet guards divisions, and an extremely clever set of weather rules. A novel approach to a tired subject, he says. Back then, a tired subject. Moscow 1941 is among the very best Soviet-German operational games, and a conceptual breakthrough. So that's high praise. Operation Typhoon, SPI 78. It only got 2.5 stars. That's interesting. Panzerkrieg, 2 stars. It's a operational studies group, released 78. Then Avalon Hill picked it up and released it in 83. Panzer Group Guderian, 4 freaking stars. Great game. I won't go into that though for time purposes. Prokhorovka, Armor at Kursk, 3 stars. That's a Task Force Games game. Came out in 79. Red Army, Game Designers Workshop, 2 stars. Russia's War, 2 stars. 1983 release. Scorched Earth gets 3.5 stars. That's, of course, the expansion to Fire in the East. The thing added 3 more maps, as if it wasn't big enough. Another 4,000 counters? Seriously? The supplementary rules include defection of German allies, new aircraft types, Allied Lend-Lease. That's cool they had that, because that was a big deal. The Russians really benefited from the trucks that we leased them. The four-wheel drive trucks. Seriously. An optional partisan system, and a counter for the giant German 87-meter railgun. Extends the time to the end of December 44, unless, of course, somebody achieves victory before that. And it says, with this expansion, Fire in the East becomes not so much a game as a way of life. A nightmare of detail for the average player, but heaven on earth for the fanatic, and I would add lunatic. And would include myself. To the Wolf's Lair, People's Wargames, 2.5 stars. Turning Point, The Battle of Stalingrad, SPI 1972, 2 stars. And I think this is the last page. War in the East by SPI came out in 74, first edition, and then was redone in 76, James Dunnigan. And then you also have War in Europe, which combines War in East and War in the West. It got 2.5 stars. But it says the eventual result of SPI's Stalingrad 2 project of 67. War in the East rivals Game Design Workshop's Drongnach Osten in scale and scope, but is quite different in character, where Drongnach Osten went overboard, it says, in its attention to detail, War in the East comes up short in the department of tender loving care. Its map is replete with spelling errors, the complete lack of differentiation between units of the same type, transform the armies on both sides into faceless crowds. Though the game begins in an explosion of activity, the excitement is short-lived, invariably becoming a drawn-out slugfest over a few cities the German player needs to fulfill for his victory conditions. But it's not without its merits, and aside from its breathtaking size, entailing 2,000 counters and a 44 by 56 inch map sheet, the Kursk-derived game mechanics are sound and reasonable, though uninspired by today's standards. The use of variable combat results tables, which worsen for the Germans as the game progresses, is a nice touch. The Soviet order of battle is more accurate than that of Drang nach Osten, with a much greater number of weaker rifle divisions. Best of all is the ingenious production spiral that lets the Soviet player allocate production points to build and train almost any type of unit he wishes. But even though the game is playable, surprisingly so, considering its magnitude, it's hardly worth the trouble. It says War in the East may be slightly easier to manage than Drang nach Osten, but Drang nach Osten is the hands-down winner in development and historicity. If you want a monster in your closet, Drang nach Osten, or better yet, Fire in the East, is the better choice. War in the East underwent a thorough revision in '76 with the rules completely reworked and the number of counters cut in half. The new version links with the equally monstrous War in the West to make War in Europe. The slimmed-down War in the East is a more enjoyable game than its predecessor, and War in Europe is better still, mainly due to War in the West, the best of the lot. All of them are more work than fun. The entire series is now out of print, but are highly sought by collectors of the anachronistic. And SPI released the research and data behind these monster games in book form as Strategy and Tactics Study Number 1, War in the East, a book which I have read and enjoyed thoroughly. If you can get a hold of a copy of this, it's bulging with stats and information. And White Death, cover this too. Game Designers Workshop, 1979, Frank Chadwick. White Death, Valiki Luki, to Stalingrad of the North. Covers the, everything. Russians wanted to turn everything into another Stalingrad. They wanted to do that with Korsan. They call it Stalingrad on the Dnieper. They call it the Valiki Luki, the Stalingrad of the North. Boy, they're sure proud of that. I guess rightly so. Covers the 1942 winter battle for the city of Valiki Luki. Surrounded by a desolate landscape of ice and snow that most wargamers will find unique. Although credit is given to Desert Rats for inspiring the movement system, to Korsan Pocket for the observation rule, and to Game Designer Workshop own Avalanche and Operation Crusader for other ideas, White Death is no more mere collection of spare parts, but a well-rounded design of admirable elegance and playability. Especially notable are the inclusion of morale and separate anti-tank factors based on unit type and terrain. These concepts are not uncommon in tactical games, but they are seldom handled as well in operational games. White Death also does a good job of simulating the tension of a bleak situation, as continued on page 55. Oh, cool. View from the trenches and the whole report on Atlanticon 89. Oh, wow. A picture of a ton of people in this hall. Just packed with people playing and gaming. Wow, there's the old Avalon Hill booth showing their new games, Hollow Legions, Turning Point Stalingrad, Desert Wall, and Siege of Jerusalem, as well as main battle tank. And then I can see a picture of a Partisan, as well as the new, I think, ASL Annual. Wow, very cool. Then it shows a portion of the auction fair, and I kid you not, this is stacks and stacks and stacks of games. And long article on low-intensity conflict, specifically Central America. It's cool, though. They do a review on it, and then they do this a lot in these magazines. They'll do a review of it and then offer the designer a chance to respond, and does that here as well. And then it ends with Winter Storm, Vanguard Games, 1981. Got 2.5 stars. Winter War. What's the SPI Finnish game? 2.5 stars. I'll end with this. Simulates the Soviet assault on Finland, and in spite of some rules glitches and an over-reliance on luck, does a pretty good job of it. The Finns begin with hidden deployment, inverted counters mixed with a few dummies, leaving the Soviets the unenviable task of ferreting out the trouble spots early in the game. Soviets have strong forces, the Finns have mobility advantages, thanks to a good rail system, but overall it's a tough contest for the Soviets because of the generally solid Finnish defense. It's a lively game all the same, and a good candidate for an overhaul. So there is your walk down memory lane in my Lord Are we really? Wow, this show went far too long. So I have to go back and edit a number of things out, but hopefully you enjoyed that. And that's it for this episode. As far as the next episode goes, I have no idea. But hopefully it will be, in fact, next week. And hopefully you will enjoy that. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening, and keep gaming.